Hello and welcome back to my channel if this is your first time here. Hi, I'm Cassidy. If it's not, thanks for always tuning into my videos. Today I'm doing a discussion video on Jade City by Fonda Lee. I recently read this book and then I went and spiraled into reviews and I watched a crazy ton of reviews by people whose opinions I love and admire. And the more reviews I watched, the more I wanted to talk about it and I wanted to discuss the things people are saying. Because for me, I loved Jade City, I really enjoyed my time with it, but I have criticisms of the book. And before going to watch people's reviews, I had never heard a criticism before. I always just heard people loved it. And I will say, the majority of things talked about are people loving it. This book did something so well where there are very few negative opinions on it, or criticisms almost, even like I mean, my opinion's not even negative. I gave it 4 stars, but I have, like, clear criticisms of the book, and I really wanted to find people who also had these criticisms. I did find some, but the majority have been positive. I think that does say something about Jade City and about the fact that marketing-wise has been amazing and it has gotten into the hands of people who are truly going to love it and people who will appreciate it for what it is. I'm gonna put a disclaimer that I'm still sick. Like all my videos out there right now, I am getting over COVID and you can hear it in my voice and I'm sorry. I'm a little gross, but hello, welcome to a Jade City discussion. Also, another disclaimer, this video will be spoiler free, but at the same time, I am discussing Jade City. It's gonna be an in-depth discussion, spoiler free. So if you are one of those people who doesn't even want to know what's on the back of a synopsis, maybe don't watch this. And yeah, let's just like get on into it. This is like less of a review and more of just a talking video. So the first thing I noticed when I was watching reviews was that everyone, I mean everyone, talks about the characters.
Characters in the Call family, I love every single one of them. And
that Fonda Lee does incredibly is to create morally gray characters. Go give Miss Fonda a 10 out of 10. And I don't give those 10 out of 10s very often, but I can't, take a number down for those because they are so well done.
Outstanding characters. Hilo is more of the muscle.
And these characters are what kept me turning the page.
So many people love these characters. They think they're like perfect. I think in Erin's review, she gives the characters 10 out of 10. She says that the characters made her fall in love with this book within like the first couple of pages. People, in my opinion, I found the characters not as well fleshed out. Specifically at the start of the book, I did not absolutely fall in love with them right away. And in fact, most people talk about the characters being the driving force for reading this book. You're rooting for them. You want to see them succeed. For me personally, I didn't really care about the individual characters. What I cared about was the No Peak clan itself. I wanted to see the No Peak clan succeed. And if you don't know, Jade City is about like 2 rival clans kind of competing over political and also monopoly over Jade. And there's just a lot going on to it. And for most people, they all just talk about the characters. I did see in Daniel Green's review, he's probably one of the only people that I saw really mention how well fleshed out the clans were and how you could understand completely the rival between the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan and like root for the clans themselves.
The relationship between these two feels like 2 characters in itself.
And that's something I completely adored about this book, is that I understood how this clan worked, all the mechanisms from down on the street level to political top, and I rooted for them. I rooted for the clan as a whole, not necessarily the 3 main characters. Everyone else talks about their love of the characters. Specifically, you always hear about Hilo's character. I will say that Leanne from Leanne's Library has the best overview of Hilo and Hilo's desire and like why he's such a fleshed out character by the end of the book, and I'm gonna place it on the screen somewhere for everyone to see.
it's not just a situation where like, oh, he's a really violent guy, but he's a softie on the inside, which like is cliche and also doesn't really make any kind of sense for a character to be that way. Hilo, when you read about him, you come to realize that he's just extremely all in about everything in his life. So if he's like fully committed to violence, if he's fully committed to hating you, then he's all in. There's no gray area for him. He's never going to be like on the fence about something. If he's, if you're somebody that he loves, then he loves you and would move heaven and earth for you. If you're someone he hates, then he hates you and he will move heaven and earth to hurt you.
Because she does Hilo's description very justice in explaining how you could think that Hilo's like tough man, but like he's soft inside, which is such a typical trope no one likes to see, but like it's not that, it's just that Hilo is very passionate about everything he does. So if he hates you, he hates you. If he loves you, he loves you. There's no like, I'm mean and soft at the same time. It's just that he's all of that. Like he does everything to the fullest degree. And I completely agree with that. And I think that's why Hilo does get some love. But I personally found Hilo's character to be very one-dimensional at the start, although as I kept reading the book, I personally think that Fonda Lee did this for a reason, because if you read the book, there's something that happens, and at that point, you see a very big flip in Hilo's character, and I think that you see the first half of the book, a very one-dimensional side of Hilo, to get this like, almost like stereotypical thoughts on how he's this big, mean character, but then the switch is flipped and you start to understand him more and he gets more depth. And so I think that Fonda Lee purposely kind of wrote him a little bit more one-dimensional at the beginning to give you a more emotional impact when you see his character grow. Because all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I am rooting for Hilo. He is the best character. Although, in my opinion, I think my favorite character overall is Shay, and I loved the storyline that Shay goes through. I found her storyline the most relatable in terms of she wanted to get out from this family destiny, from this family clan. She wanted to do something else, but the whole family is pushing on her to come back in. And I don't know, I found her very relatable, and I found her relatable as a woman in a society where, like, you're almost looked down upon and you have to work, not almost, she is looked down upon and she has to work just a little bit harder to be different, but she doesn't really want to work that hard when she could just leave. I found her very relatable. One discussion I did see is on Elliot Brooks's channel, which I found this one very interesting because Elliot Brooks talks about how there's one scene in particular, no spoilers, where Shay says something in her head about how women are because there's two strong female characters in this book, in my opinion. They're meeting, they have a whole thing. She says something about how women are destined to either, two strong women who could become allies, but if they don't, they're destined to be enemies. And Elliot Brooks talks about how this was a big no for her because she was like, why? Like, she like wanted to see them as a strong character, and like, why would a strong woman who's like ready to be better than the men and prove herself say these kind of things?
I really wanted the two of them to have an incredible moment where they have to work against the adversity that they have to encounter. And I felt like I was finally getting that. There's a scene in the book where I was like, oh yes, I'm loving this. I'm loving this. And at the end of this scene where these two women are interacting, the main girl, Shay, has this thought. And I'm like, what? It says, two strong-minded women in a man's world, if they do not quickly become allies, are destined to be incurable rivals. Why? Why? There's no reason why two strong-minded women, like, that doesn't make any sense. It's basically like, well, if women aren't besties, we're gonna be enemies. And I'm like, no, that's that.
I think it was one of Elliot's like least favorite lines in the whole book. That was one of my favorites. So I just think it's so cool how you can interpret something in such different ways, because I interpreted it as like more of like this like review on society. Like, she was saying like how like I thought of it as like how terrible, like we could be friends, but like society has taught us to be enemies. So if like I saw it as like we're two strong women, and like if we don't become friends, society has taught us, ingrained in us so much that women are supposed to fight each other and be enemies. And I thought it was more of like a discussion on society as a whole and what society has taught you. So it was one of my favorite lines in the whole book, because I was like, yes, Shay's realizing that like society has trained her to think this, and I knew she could either go one of two ways, be her friend or be her enemy, and I wanted to see her turn obviously in one way other than the other, and like fight against what society has taught her. So I just thought that was very interesting to see how different lines can be interpreted so different ways. But I will say, Anne and Dora's did talk in her review about how she felt like Hilo got the most time and the most character development, which is something I completely agree with, and that she wishes she had seen that for other people, and that would have helped a lot. And I completely agree with that too, because although Shay was my favorite character, I think, to read, I wish I had gotten more and more development from her. So where like Hilo got so much page time in the end that obviously you were gonna come to love him. And another one I saw is both the reviews that I watched of people who didn't overly love this book as much as other people were Elliot Brooks and Anna Doris, and they both liked a character on the other side of the world and wanted a character on the other side of the world to be more of a protagonist and get POVs from that character, not the other side of the world, the other clan.
Have the Mountain Clan, and those are the antagonists through the book. And I'm gonna just say this: I stan Aunt Madda. I really liked her as a character, and I really wish we got her perspective in this story because, or do you know what, actually, I'm just going to say it. I feel like the book should have been from her perspective the whole time. Because
everything we hear about the other clan, I totally wanted to know more about that person than all of the characters in the clan that we do follow. The other person sounded so much more interesting and so much more fascinating. Because
I thought that was interesting because I think what it came down to, if you really loved this book or not, is whether you were like in love with the characters. And interesting for me is I was not in love with the characters, and I do agree with them that this character on the other side of the, like on the other clan, the rival clan, is the most interesting, which is Ait, who's like this badass leader of the rival clan, and I would have actually really enjoyed a POV from her, but at the same time, I think if I had gotten her POV, I would have known too many of the ins and outs of the rival clan. But I thought that was interesting how both those readers liked Ait better, and I think that leads to some con that was for me, was that I wanted this book to be more morally gray than it is, and I think Ait could have led to the morally gray. Like, she was a good morally grey character, and so
Okay, Aunt Madda got the memo that this was a Godfather-inspired story. Okay, we've got gangsters in this story. Okay, and she's gangster. She knows what to do to get things done. That's why I stan Aunt Madda. And she could have been the grey protagonist that we all really needed in this story.
Both the people who disliked it, I wonder if they also wanted that. Because I know I went into this being like, everyone talks about these morally grey characters, but they were not grey enough for me. I didn't actually find them that grey. I actually kind of found most of them to be a more heroic archetype. Although, like, yes, we're following a gang, and obviously a gang doesn't always do the best things, we didn't see much of them just doing those things. Maybe it's because I'm used to watching kind of more gang shows, something like Sons of Anarchy, where you see these people being brutal for absolutely no reason. Every character in this story that we followed was not brutal for no reason. They almost were heroic in the way they acted, like they were doing it for heroic reasons, and I wanted it to be darker. I wanted to see them slip up and kill someone for no reason at all. I wanted to have more grit. I wanted to see why the clan might not be the right clan. Like, I wanted to maybe, like, feel, like, I wanted to be sitting here being like, I should not be rooting for these people. I should not be rooting for this clan. But I am. Like, I am. And I was not feeling that way. I always felt like they were always doing the right thing. Another thing I noticed from the people who didn't overly love the book versus the people who really loved it was a flip side on what they wanted from the books. So the people who didn't like it as much wanted more fight scenes. They wanted more Jade. They wanted to see the magic system more in depth.
Yet there was barely any use of said Jade in the book.
Kind of wish that we had gotten to see characters use Jade more often.
Where the people who loved it really loved that slow political burn that we got.
This turf war and them trying to take it, I actually preferred that to a more action-packed street-level view.
And so I thought that was very interesting to see what works for some doesn't work for others. Personally, in my opinion, I fall somewhere in the middle. I loved the slow politics. I loved sitting in the courtrooms. Not the courtrooms. Sitting in the boardrooms. But I also really wish I had seen more of that Jade use and that magic system use. Fonda Lee really doesn't hold your hand with the magic system. I think something that I saw in every single review was that the magic system is not 100% well laid out. You understand the magic system, like I completely understand it, but it just, she tells you what you need to know and you can find out more if you want, but like she's not spitting the magic system at you. She's not repeating it. She's not making sure you know every single in and out of this hard magic system. Like, this system has rules, but truthfully, a lot of people have said that the magic system works in a way where if you had just put any like enhancing drug instead of Jade, the story would not have changed. It's not a very fantastical magic system. And while we're discussing magic systems, I really loved Leanne's Library talking about the magic system in her review, where she says,
Sense to me how she would choose to make Jade a resource that does not have to be renewed. I would think narratively it would make more sense to have Jade be something that you use up.
She discusses how she thought it was an interesting take for the Jade not to be like renewable is the term I'm going to use, but that's not correct. I'll put her little clip in. So the fact that once you have Jade, you have it, that's it, versus something like Mistborn, which is another thing I saw almost everyone compare this magic system to Mistborn, which I thought was interesting, because it does work similar, but it's very different. Not everyone, I saw a lot of people. Or something like Mistborn, where once you ingest a metal, you can run out of it, and you have to ingest it again. That's not the way it is with Jade. And I think that was a negative for Leanne, but for me, I thought that was such an interesting new take on fantasy that, like, I have it. I don't have to run out. Because even in, even in something like the Wheel of Time or something, you can run out of your magic, and in this one, you don't really. But I loved the idea of, like, almost like an overdose from Jade, is what I'm gonna call it. I loved that idea that some people go sick from using Jade or having too much Jade. So there is negative aspects about using the Jade and using too much of it, having too much of it, having too much power, using too much power. It's just not the idea that we're normally used to where someone runs out of it. But at the same time, like, it's not something I completely thought about until I saw Leanne talking about it, and then I was like, oh right, it's not renewable. Like, you don't have to, like, get it again. You just always have it. It's just Jade. Like, the magic's there. If you have Jade, you have the magic. If you have more Jade, you have more magic. So I thought that was interesting, because it's not something I personally thought about before Leanne had this discussion in her review. Something talked about in all the reviews often is the pacing. Most people love the pacing. Everyone will say it's really, really slow. I think Library of Alexandria does it quite best with his metaphor.
It's a single ember catching in kindling, and it just slowly starts catching the kindling on fire before it turns into kind of a blaze.
Or Daniel Green also says the book is an avalanche, just starting and then coming at you at the end. Everyone talks about the pacing. Everyone does say it's slow, and specifically the start is very slow. But I find the people who loved it thought the pacing was perfect and immaculate, even though it was slow. So I believe Tori Morrow talks about pacing and how it's perfect and incredible. But I also found that, like, Murphy talks about how the first half of the book was a slog for her. Not a slog, but she had to, like, push through the first half of the book. That's half the reason it didn't get a full 5 stars, is because that first half was just so slow. The first half, you're meandering, you're learning so much politics, there was a lot of info dumping. Things like Elliot Brooks talks about how in the first half of the book, you get a lot of information that is pointless. And it becomes too slow because there's scenes where, like, someone is eavesdropping in this conversation and you're getting the bits of the conversation, but in between there's a discussion on where that character's family is and how they fit into the world and where their roles are within this clan, but you never see that character very much ever again, so why did it matter? Like, there's just, like, a slowness to the world building that is so meandering, so it worked for some people, it didn't work for others. For me, I found the beginning very slow, although I knew I loved the book right away, and I read the book so quickly. I did find that very slow, and I remembered in my Discord group, because it was my buddy read, I told people that I found the first couple chapters, all the characters sounded the same to me because there was so much info dumping of the world and where people stood, that the info dumps were so similar that I had a hard problem associating which POV I was in when I received that info dump, because there was just, like, so much of that at the beginning, which led to this very meandering pace until you get about halfway when things start to pick up. And I thought it was very interesting to see so many people talk about how amazing the pacing is, even though it's slow. Another thing for me that I wanted to see, that at first I was watching so many reviews and I was like, no one's saying this, is that I found the book to be quite predictable. I knew the main plot points in like a rough idea as I went along pretty early on. I knew things were going to happen. There's something middle of the book that I knew was going to happen. I knew kind of the end game of this book in the end very easily. I found it like predictable, and I wanted other people to say that. Not a lot of other people did. Murphy does talk about how she saw things coming, so I think maybe Fonda Lee just puts the hints there for people who are looking for it, but not everyone's gonna find it predictable. For me, I knew the rough idea, and it didn't take necessarily away from the book that much, because I didn't know how it was going to be executed. I just knew that this was like the path we were on and that this was going to happen. Specifically, there's something that happens midpoint of the book that I thought was going to happen way later on in the book, but it does happen earlier. And so I was shocked that it happened earlier, but I wasn't shocked that it happened. Now, Murphy talks about how this didn't bother her because she was still like hard-hitted by everything that happened, where some of these things bothered me because I did not get that hard-hitting feeling. I was not gut-wrenched by it, which I think goes back to the fact that I didn't overly love the characters the way everyone else who loves this book does. But I had the opportunity. I could see why some people would get gut-wrenched, but it just didn't happen to me. And me not adoring the characters and me seeing these things happen, I think just like both reacted to not give me that gut punch. I still loved the storyline and I loved seeing those things happen, but I didn't get that gut punch. And part of that was because of something Daniel Green says too.
I had one slight criticism. There's a couple plot beats and things that happen where I felt like characters made choices just because they needed to make that choice for the plot to happen.
And I found that happen a couple times where I was like, okay, I needed more to get here. There was a couple plot points in this for me where I was like, I understand how this character could get here, but they didn't get there yet for me. And they just did that to like hurry on the plot too fast, too early. Like I needed more time to like get to that point, and I didn't get it. It happened a couple times in this book, which is something I have not seen anyone talk about really, until I had my Discord group, and Maria talks about it a little bit with me, and she gave the first book 3 stars, but she loves the rest of the series, so I'm hoping that those things will go away for me, but that is something I kept seeing happen. And the other problem with this predictability for me is that it leaded the book to having no stakes for me, which is something that no one else will say. Everyone else I saw reviews for talks about how there's so many stakes in this book. Murphy particularly puts it as a pro.
But there are very real stakes in this book. When characters are in danger, I believe you that they might die or get...
And I agree where she's coming from. There's stakes in the fact that Fonda Lee is willing to hurt her characters. She's not going to just let them all live and come off with no injuries to either themselves or their hearts or something around them. Like she will. There are stakes in the fact that your characters are not safe, but in the book itself, I felt like there was no stakes because I knew too much. And I think that's my biggest reason for not giving this book 5 stars, is I just knew, like, I just had no stakes because, like, I knew how the book would end. Like, it just made no sense for it not to end any other way. Like, I just knew it. And, like, that could just be a me problem because no one else besides Murphy talks about predictability. So, like, maybe that's just me. Like, maybe I'm alone on the fact that it was predictable. And I'm not saying every detail was predictable. It's just, like, the general concept I knew was going to happen. Like, these bigger plot points I knew was going to happen. These smaller plot points I didn't necessarily know. I'm kind of jumping around here a lot. But, you know, another thing that I thought was very interesting is this book has a heavy theme about generations and generational differences, but no one really talks about that in their reviews. And that's something I did enjoy in this book, is the discussion of things are changing and things aren't how they used to be, and each generation feels like their generation is doing it the right way. So like the Granda in this changed things for his generation, and now he's stuck in that generation. And I felt like that was such an interesting concept, like conversation in the book. But it does happen mainly for me through a character who I disliked being there. And I also saw no one talk about this character. Everyone else talks about like fleshed out characters, but this character was so one-dimensional and so stupid for being this book. The only person who talked about this character was Elliot Brooks. And so it leads me to think that if you loved the story, you overlooked this like one-dimensional character, but because didn't love the story, she saw this character. And I feel like that's an interesting conversation about like whether we look over flaws in books we love. Like if I went into The Poppy War very critically, could I see all the flaws that people who don't love it see? Because it's so much easier. I always say it's so much easier to nitpick the books that you dislike versus nitpicking the books you do like, because it's very hard to like see past the love that you have for a book. So you have this character, Doru, who is the weatherman, and Doru is a terrible person. He's a terrible person. Elliot Brooks hates him because he's a nasty character. He does some nasty things with some younger girls, and he's not even good at his job, is what Elliot says. She's like, not even good at his job, he's not a good person, he should be gone. Like, there's no reason for him to be part of the story besides the fact that he's a good friend of someone else. And you know what? I completely agree with this, but for me, I did see his character as the biggest idea of, like, the generational story. I think his character showed how much times have changed and how his generation, him and Granda, still think they're better than the new generation. And I think that that's a pretty big discussion that you get through his character and his character only, but you also get to see the familiar love through his character because they keep him around for their Granda, who, although is also a crappy person and should go, they love him so much they keep this terrible person around. And so I do think that there's this concept of just like family and generations and all this that you very much see through his character. I would have liked to see more of his character with like other characters loving him. Like the other characters all don't like him either. And I would have liked to see maybe like someone know he's this terrible person but still love him, because that would have added to like this morally greatness of the book that I wanted to see. Like, I shouldn't love this guy. Like, I know he's terrible, but he's also like been part of my family for so long, and like, I don't know, it would have just added a little bit more depth to me. But I found his character very stupid in the fact that I knew the reason he was being kept along the entire time. Like, it made very easy sense to me that he was who he was and he was going to do the things he did, and that he was there for one point and one point only in terms of plot. And yeah, I think he's a major flaw in the story in terms of that. Like, there's no real reason for his character. Like, I needed more. I needed more than just the grandpa connection to keep him along. As I said, I wanted to know why they kept him more, because as I said, all of these characters are heroic in terms of like their motivations. Like, they're not morally gray in terms of, though, their motivations are always good. They're good people at their core. They're not morally gray characters. Like, when you say morally gray, I'm thinking like Prince of Thorns. Like, our main character in this is a terrible person. I mean, I don't even know if he's morally gray. Or like Rin, who is morally gray. Like, she makes stupid decisions, and they're not always for the right reasons. I found every character in this book was doing their decisions for the right reason, and like, they're not bad people in any sense of the matter. Like, they treat everyone quite well, especially like their significant others. And yeah, I don't know. I already talked about that. I'm going off another tangent. I feel like I talked about a lot of negatives in this. I will say one of the like biggest positives of this book is just that it's something different. It's just something different, and I saw a lot of people talk about how it's just not what you normally get in fantasy in terms of setting, and even in terms of the fact that it's an urban fantasy. Going into an urban fantasy, I feel like I have pre-ideas of what that would mean, and this broke all of those. It was more than just an urban fantasy. And I just feel like it's something so fresh and new to the world. And I'm very late with this review because, like, obviously the whole trilogy's been out by now, but I still thought it was interesting to get this out here, and then everyone who's read the book will all know and can kind of discuss with me down below in the comments. And if you have watched this and you didn't read the book, then you can also now read the book and then watch this. I think overall I just kind of realized that a lot of the reasons people love this book were also the reasons that people didn't like this book, and I thought that's very interesting to see those like flip sides. And again, I also thought that a lot of people loved the book and then didn't have any criticisms of the book, and I think that comes down to the fact that it's just so hard to see those criticisms, and also it's very hard to talk about criticisms on BookTube. I find the second I discuss a criticism in a book, people think I didn't like the book. I gave this book 4 stars, and if you made it to the end of this video, I had a lot of criticisms. I want to discuss a lot of things that I didn't overly enjoy, but the book also did a lot of things right. So sometimes I don't like to talk about criticisms when I'm talking about a book I love, because the second I do that, people start to think negatively about a book and that I didn't love it. But that's not the case at all. So yeah, here's just my little conversation about Jade City. I'm not sure if this was enjoyable at all. Like, it wasn't even really a review, it was just a conversation about the things I wanted to talk about, and let me know if you enjoyed it or if it was very, very stupid. If you made it to the end of the video and you'd like to just leave me an emoji to say you were here, leave me a green emoji, any green emoji. If you'd like to connect with me on other platforms, my Bookstagram, my Book Twitter, my Goodreads, and my Patreon are all linked in the description bar below. Have yourselves an absolutely remarkable day.